Hi everyone, Coldon here with another Vox Immortalis Commentary guide. This video is for the Halfus Wyrmbreaker encounter in Bastion of Twilight. This shows the normal 10-man version. It's important to note that the dynamics of this fight can change in any given week, and in this first video for this encounter I plan to do a number of them to show different combinations, but I'll explain the basic setup of the fight and how it can change from week to week. If you look around the room, on the right there are 2 drakes, on the left there are also 2 drakes, and then a cage which contains a number of small whelps. So 5 in total plus Halfus, and then Halfus's pet, which is the proto-behemoth behind me on the left there. So in any given week, 3 out of the 5 drakes, the 4 drakes plus the whelps, 3 of those will be considered active for that week. The other 2 will be inactive and you cannot use them. So what that means is those 3 randomly chosen drakes will be using abilities. They'll basically have an aura that's passively applied to various things in the raid. And then they'll also have an activated ability that is activated once you actually interact with that drake and they become, attackable and they engage you. So I'll explain the abilities for Halfus, the 3 drakes that are active, and the behemoth, and I'll ignore the whelps and the inactive drake for now, until another future video. As you can see, this is slowed down quite a bit, which seems to be the case because there's so much to go over, and the fight is not that long. So you start with Halfus. As soon as you engage him, or get really close to him, he will attack. But otherwise all the drakes and the whelps remain inactive. So the only way to actually engage them is just to interact with them. You right click, there's a little bit of a cast time, and then they'll do an animation to become active. So the first drake that we attack is the Nether Scion, and his passive ability, which means the ability that he applies from the very beginning of the encounter until Halfus dies, is Frenzied Assault, which increases Halfus's attack speed by 100%. So this buff never leaves during the fight, and it's one of the more difficult passive abilities because it can combine with other things, which I'll explain in a moment. The active ability for the Nether Scion, meaning once you actually activate him, he casts Nether Blindness on Halfus, which is a debuff that reduces Halfus's attack speed. It also reduces his damage and lowers his chance to hit, all by 25%. So obviously these are all very good benefits, so the sooner you can activate him the better, and that's why we choose him as our first active drake. Because otherwise Halfus puts out crazy damage, and more importantly, it combines with the Slate Dragon's ability. So the Slate Dragon, his passive ability, again the thing that's active from the beginning till the end, is a buff on Halfus that allows him to attack with a debuff called Malevolent Strikes on the tank. This will stack up to 15 times at max, and each stack reduces the healing on the tank by 6%. So because of this, if you get the Slate Dragon, you need to swap tanks on Halfus fairly regularly. We try to swap at 5 to 6 stacks, but with the haste buff, especially if you don't activate the Nether Scion right away, it can stack up pretty quickly. So because of that, as you saw, we actually chose to try activating 2 drakes simultaneously. Normally if we get the whelp cage in a week, we don't activate 2 drakes, we just do 1 at a time, because the whelps are fairly easy. But in this case we needed to try 2, so that we would get the benefit of the active buff from both the Slate Dragon and the Nether Scion. So the active buff for the Slate Dragon is Stone Touch, which you can see he's afflicted with right now. And every 35 seconds, Halfus will be paralyzed for 12 seconds, meaning he's completely stunned and he doesn't move. So again, that's why we activated the Nether Scion and the Slate Dragon at the same time, because we wanted to get those stuns occurring. It's basically stopping 33% of Halfus's swings. So every 24 seconds, he stops for 12 seconds. It's not enough time usually for the tank to lose his stack of Malevolent Strikes, but it's certainly enough time to you know, allow the stack to tick a bit and then have a tank swap. So again, we try to swap at around 5 or 6 stacks in Malevolent Strikes, and with 2 Drakes active and Halfus, the tank that dropped Halfus picks up one of the other Drakes, usually the one the DPS are not killing. So finally we get to the Time Warden after those first 2 Drakes died, and at this point it's pretty simple. The Time Warden's passive ability, and he activates Dancing Flames, which is a buff on the Proto Behemoth that's flying in the back, and allows him to cast Fireball Barrage, which just sends a stream of fireballs onto the ground, and they're very much like the normal fireballs that are always cast in the fight, except there's more of them. So that's not too dangerous if there aren't any other AE effects, but when you activate the Time Warden, his active ability is Time Dilation, which is another debuff on the Behemoth, and it caused the fireball casts to take twice as long to cast, so it takes about 3 seconds to actually land. So if you look on the ground, there's obviously tons of stuff coming down, but because the Time Warden is activated, it's all dodgeable. If a player chooses, they can actually get out of the fire before it hits. That said, they're not that dangerous as long as you're not bunched up. Probably melee are the most in danger, so you want to try to spread out in sort of a square or triangle formation. Other than that, the Time Warden's very simple, and usually you can leave him till the end. And then once the 3rd Drake dies, regardless of your set, once the 3rd Drake or 2 Drakes and the Whelps, depending on your combination, once they die, then Halfus is your main target. You can't kill the Behemoth, so don't bother. And he just will float in the back, and as I said, he'll cast Fireball and Fireball Barrage on the raid. Halfus himself really doesn't have anything to speak of during most of the fight. He just does melee attacks and then whatever buffs he's given by the Drakes. But once he reaches, I think 30% it is, we'll see here, he will go into his final phase. And his final phase, he will cast an ability called Furious Roar, which is 3 pulses of a raid-wide stun. The pulses are only about a second or a second and a half, and there it is right there, so I guess it was at 50%. Regardless, as you see, he's casting 1.5 seconds, then he stuns you, and then casts again, another couple seconds, stuns you. So essentially you're fully stunned the entire duration of 3 casts. However, the only time that's truly dangerous is if the tank is not full health, or doesn't have a cooldown, or if you have the Storm Rider active, Storm Rider Drake, which we don't, so again I'll explain that in a future video, how to deal with that. Otherwise, just know that the Furious Roar is coming. It's not really dangerous enough to kill any raid members that are at a reasonable health level, and you can also help just by dodging fireballs as soon as you get out to help your healers a bit. And otherwise, this point of the fight is really simple. It's also worth noting that as a Drake dies, Halfus gains a debuff that increases the damage he takes by 50% per Drake. I think it's 50%. So if you're wondering about not killing any of the Drakes, just to kill Halfus, especially if you're new to the fight and you may be up against the Berserk timer, I strongly encourage you to kill Drakes. They don't have that much health relative to Halfus, and those percentage debuffs will actually add up a lot. That said, what you can do is pick a strong single target DPS person to stay on Halfus full time, and everyone else will kill Drakes. And it will take you slightly longer to kill Drakes, obviously, but Halfus will actually be extremely low health when you actually turn to engage him. For a different week spawn, we had an Enhancement Shaman on Halfus full time to do interrupts, and not only was he over 30,000 DPS for the duration of the fight, but once we killed the final Drake, Halfus was already at 50% health. So it makes a huge difference if you can afford to have one person stick on Halfus. And that's really all there is to it. Like I said, this is one of those fights that the difficulty actually drops as the fight goes on. So while I don't encourage you to use Bloodlust early, if you're just learning the fight, it may be worth trying to Bloodlust to get that first Drake down, just to see how stable you can make the fight, because all the big spikes in damage and all the difficult decisions are generally going to be early on when you're dealing with Halfus plus a Drake or two, you know, deciding which whelp, if you want to do whelps or which Drake next and all that stuff. So that's it for this one, and be sure to look out for future Halfus videos to show other combinations. So thanks for watching and good luck.